April 12th. Fancy meeting you here. Grab a coffee and let's get smarter together. To understand Pythagoras' promise that mathematical ratios were the key to understanding the nature of the universe because all things, including humans, were ultimately composed of numbers, we must return to the heroic societies. They represented the counter-reaction to standardization efforts that tilted the explorer-exploit balance farther to the exploit side. And as such, they dialed the balance all the way to exploring, with a focus on the exploration of a personal self. The more costumes, also known as identities, signified by titles, they could wear in their game-like contests and theatrical performances that made up their politics and daily lives, the better. Everything circled around the unique and the new, and like today. Since inhabitants of places like Aslan Tepe, the world's first known palace, unfortunately for us, rejected writing so that there wasn't any way to trap them in an identity of yesterdays, what accounts we usually have about these societies is from sources who lived much later after these societies had already transformed again. And that's where our detour to the Pacific Northwest comes in, and my t-shirt. Because there too lived heroic societies. And since these survived until the Europeans crashed into the Americas, they'd been observed before they got destroyed and their artifacts put into museums. Artifacts like their exuberantly ornamented masks within masks, employed in their rituals, which were theatrical performances really. The societies of the Pacific Northwest also shared the same basic social structures when Europeans encountered them, with the hereditary ranks of nobles who often accumulated many titles over the course of their lifetimes. Commoners, and very uncommon for Amerindian societies, slaves. We are lucky that the archaeology, and one day I will speak this word without stopping, allows us to observe the reason as well as the subsequent emergence of the heroic societies there. Starting around 1850 BC, what, if you keep track, is only roughly 100 years before Hammurabi in Mesopotamia made his Jubilee Declaration. This is when at the Pacific coast in the Northwest, bulk harvesting of salmon started. That's a form of standardization, the exploitation of an idea that requires lots of working hands with no explorer minds attached to them. At the same time, we also find the first signs of fortifications, palaces like in Aslan Tepe, and something else, cemeteries that reveal an extreme disparity in the treatment of the dead, something not seen before, also like in Aslan Tepe. At the top end, the most privileged burials exhibit formal systems of body ornamentation and the somewhat macabre staging of corpses in seated, reclined, or other fixed positions, presumably referencing a strict hierarchy of ritual postures and manners among the living. This immediately reminded me of a Pesach ritual, which goes back to the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt at around the same time, and the prohibition to recline during the ritual because slaves were not allowed to recline either. But, more broadly speaking, if we assume that hierarchy developed as a structure of permission to explore oneself and one's world, tying it to ever more reclining seating positions makes sense as relaxation is beneficial for both deep conversation and meditation, self-reflection. And what enforces this idea is the fact that in the societies of the Pacific Northwest, nobles alone, those buried in these strange positions, enjoyed the ritual prerogative to engage with guardian spirits. What's a fancy way of saying they had the permission to look for other identities inside themselves or reach stage 5 and above of Robert Kegan's model of mental development. Now, let's step back to the early days of heroic societies. Asked to become explorers of a bulk fish harvesting idea, some households went to the other extreme of Uber-explorers and attracted retainers. Often brilliant artists and craftspeople, because they too didn't like so much to be exploiters and rather wanted to explore. There was not a shortage of working hands gathered in these places, in these households, but they belonged in their majority to what would become aristocratic title holders, the exact same people rejecting the shift to the exploitation of existing knowledge in favor of an increased emphasis on exploration expressed in their game-like contests and theatrics and indulgence in food and especially drink, which they didn't want to produce. These people wanted to go on adventures, hunts, and they felt strongly that this exploitation of someone else's idea that in the Pacific Northwest involved building wires and gutting fish was not for them. There were also several such households who all competed fiercely with one another for retainers. They vied for their allegiance by sponsoring feasts and entertainment, for which they didn't have food. So, if these people were pressed too hard or were called up and too often to organize food, they'd instantly defect to another household. In the end, they too had come to join their counter-reactive households because they were explorers and not exploiters. What to do? Heroic societies became capturing societies. It was really only a small step. The raids to take slaves were hunts, adventures on which everyone partaking could let their identity shine. They were perfect tools to attract retainers, and the slaves increased the household's capacity of carrying labor. The balance to the dial of exploration turned all the way up. Slaves became walking dead because all their life force, all the energy inside them to generate a world and self of their own, was taken from them and poured into the creation of the many identities their masters got to live because of them. As more and more such households sprang up, intergroup raiding became epidemic. The early Iron Age was therefore a time when the political landscape all over the world were broken into a checkerboard of often diminutive kingdoms and city-states, most often at constant war externally and locked into constant political debate internally. That's the world of hyper-explorers like Alexander the Great, with whom we will pick up the story tomorrow. For now, balance, lure, explore, exploit, the equilibrium, also known as think. Make a habit out of thinking. Let's turn thinking into a movement, so not to remain the playboys of hyper-explorers and hyper-exploiters. Like, comment, share, and follow lest you miss a single opportunity to improve yourself and society. Thank you for gifting me with a few minutes of your most precious, your lifetime. I'm really grateful for it.